Good evening, members. Welcome to our Stars of the Rhone taste along this evening. My name is Catherine. I'm one of the events managers in the events team, and I am thrilled that Fiona, our buyer for Rhone, is joining us as well for this tasting of six very delicious wines. Hi, Fiona. How are you this evening?
Hey, evening. Thanks for
If you
having me.
If you are joining us with the tasting pack, I am very quickly just going to run through the order that we are tasting in because it is slightly different to the numbered order of the samples. And I will be sharing a wine page per wine, so you'll be able to keep up, and I will pop it in the chat shortly as well. But just very quickly, we will be starting with the Gigondas. We'll then be moving on to the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Then we are going to the Côte-Rôtie. Then we are going to Cornas, then Saint-Joseph, and finishing with the Crozes-Hermitage. So if you have pre-poured your wines, you may need to do a little reshuffle. Or if you're opening as you go, that's the order. As I said, I will pop those into the chat, and I can see we've got a few people already popping some hellos into the chat. We've got Bristol, York, Eastbourne. So do let us know where you are. We'd love to hear what you think of the wines. If you've got any questions about the wines that we're tasting or about the Rhone in general, feel free to pop those into the Q&A. If we can answer them this evening live, we will. If we can't, we will take that question away and we'll be able to get back to you by email as well. So I think that covers everything. I think we're ready to kind of get started and talk maybe a little bit about the Rhone in general, Fiona, and then also a little bit about maybe a little bit about what you love so much about the Rhone. Because we've had a real thorough kind of Rhone in-depth 2 weeks. So maybe it might
Yeah,
be nice to hear about your Rhone, as it were.
I feel at the moment I'm definitely eating, drinking, sleeping Rhone. We've had the fine wine takeover, which comes to an end today, and then the en primeur of the 2024s, which is really exciting. And last week we had our first ever for the Wine Society en primeur tasting, so our members got to taste these a lot of these wines that are still in barrel for the first time, which was great. And I think for me, the Rhone is just so diverse, and we group the north and the south together. So we're tasting from both this evening, and they're actually quite diverse. The north is continental in climate. The real sort of star grapes are Syrah for red, Viognier for white, and then the south is very much Mediterranean climate, and blends are key here. Grenache is king, but you blend with Mourvèdre, a bit of Syrah, and some other permitted grape varieties as well. So I love the diversity. I think you can still get tremendous value there. And yeah, I love going there every year. I spend a long time. I spend many weeks, probably about 5 weeks a year in the Rhone. So it feels like home.
And there's lots of sort of, I think as a place to visit, as a wine region to visit, there's so much great scenery that really kind of helps you really kind of put place to some of those wine regions and how, when you're looking at the higher elevation, when you're seeing sort of the mountains in the Rhone and those wines that have that higher acidity and how it all kind of blends together, and Chateauneuf with the big stones, and it's one of those quite tactile regions that really gives you an insight to the wines.
Yeah, I agree. I really think that to really understand a region, you have to sort of visit, and then walking through the vineyards for me is key. And especially if you're in the north and you're climbing the Hermitage Hill, you really appreciate the steepness, and you really sort of feel for these workers that are going out there, especially if they're picking in the real sort of heat, and everything. And yeah, you can cycle along the Rhone Valley, Rhone River, and then when you get into the south, especially, you've got Mont Ventoux if you're a really serious cyclist. the Domaine de Montréal and Baume de Venise. So there's something for everyone, really.
I would love to be a serious enough cyclist to be able to do that, but having learnt to cycle in Stevenage, where the entire town is connected by a cycle track, I'm very poor. I can only signal with one arm because I've never had to learn how to cycle on a road or anywhere that's not a cycle track. But maybe one day, maybe I'll just do a Rhone tour by walking. That feels
Yes,
that's safer than
that sounds
driving.
safer for sure.
Lovely. So we've got six wines to try. So, as mentioned, we're going to taste the Gigondas first,
Yeah.
then the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and then the Côte-Rôtie, and then we'll go on to the next three. I have just popped those first three into the chat, and I will pop the others in just as we're going as well. But members as well, don't hold back on like letting us know what you think. Do put your comments in as you're tasting with us. But perhaps Fiona, we'll talk about first wine. So the
Yeah,
Gigondas. So we're in the southern
Gigondas.
Rhone.
Yes, we're in the south. About Gigondas has about 1,200 hectares planted, and for reds, you need a minimum of 50% of Grenache to make up the blend, a bit like Chateauneuf. And we're at slight altitude here. We're about 400 up to 400 meters. Lots of the vineyards are just in the foothills of the Domaine de Montmirail. And quite exciting things, I think, are happening in Gigondas. You're seeing a lot more of the younger generation coming through. And recently, the white wines of Gigondas became a cru. That was in 2020. Sorry, 2023. So exciting things happening there. This producer, Moulin de la Gardette, I love. Only a small family business. They've got 10 hectares. Jean-Baptiste Meunier, he's a total sweetheart, and he's just been joined by his daughter Zoe Meunier, who, if you came to the en primeur tasting last week, then she was there presenting the wines, and I think only good things are going to happen from that. They have lots of old vines, so for this wine, a minimum of sort of average of 50-year-old vines. So you're getting that real sort of concentration coming through. It's about 80% Grenache, a little bit of Mourvedre, Sanso, and it spends about 18 months in Burgundy barrels. 2019 was quite a powerful and structured vintage. It's only sort of just starting to come around, I think, a lot of the 19s. I think some in particular still need more time. And a lot of them are quite deep in colour, very structured, some quite opulent. I think this is quite a restrained. This is their sort of style in a way. I say restrained, but it's 14.5% alcohol. It's quite full bodied. But for Gigondas, there is a real purity of fruit there. It's not just because 2019, it was very sunny, especially in June and July. But actually August wasn't too hot. So you don't necessarily get a lot of the baked fruit characters coming through, I don't think. Yes, there is a ripeness there, but it's not overripe. And I think classic to Gigondas, you really get those sort of red fruits which come from the Grenache, but also those garrigue sort of wild herb notes coming through as well. But I also think that, as I said before, it's quite a structured vintage, and the tannins, I think you're still feeling. And I think that this wine would benefit from a little more time in bottle before opening. So one to lay down potentially. And I think that there's good freshness there, as well as those tannins and lots of complex layers of fruit that means that I don't have any worries about it aging, leaving
Yeah.
the cellar.
Because that's that backbone, isn't it, that makes it age worthy. It's got that
Yeah,
structure to hold the intensity together. And
absolutely.
Rich has just commented that he can smell and taste the high alcohol. Um, I mean, I feel that too, Richard. Like on swallowing it, it is definitely warming. Um, but again, I think if a few years that will have kind of mellowed in and kind of come together a little more.
I think definitely that sort of warmth resolves a little bit. And
Mm,
I also think that this is a perfect wine to pair with food,
yeah,
which a lot of Rhone wines are, to be honest.
yeah,
Then they're sort of not meant to be aperitif wines. They're definitely wines that deserve food and actually come into their own with that.
yeah. And to have that lovely garrigue as well, those really nice kind of bushy, woody herbs. And for any sort of like roast meat, really, that would really pair nicely if you're doing like lamb or beef with like thyme and things. I think that would be something that's really quite delicious. Just on drink dates. So Leslie, the notes say about best before July 2026. That is just for the sample pouch. That's not for the wine itself.
That confused me. I was like, what?
Yeah, so that's actually just a required best before for the samples. The actual drink date we've got it to is 2030. But having said that, I think that's still perhaps a little
I think that's conservative, to be
conservative.
honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would
Um,
probably be wanting to start drinking this about 32 onwards.
yeah.
Um, Especially these sort of growers, they've got 10 hectares, a lot of their vineyards are old vines. There's real sort of attention to detail going on. The quality is high.
Yeah.
This is one of the top producers of Gigondas,
Yeah.
and I've gone to the cellar and I've tasted some really old vintages from them, and they're absolutely stunning.
And if it's not too gauche to kind of jump straight to pricing, this is £25 a bottle. So
Yeah.
for a wine of this quality that by all intents and purposes you would describe as a fine wine, that's, I would think, remarkably good value for how age-worthy it is, the concentration you're getting, the just the quality of this wine. And perhaps it's one of those things that the Rhone, saying one to watch is a little bit like it's not really because it's the Rhone, but perhaps it's one to take a little bit of a closer look at in comparison to some of the other more traditional French regions in what you can get, or perhaps it's more producer led that you can find some real gems of
I think when at
real
the start when I
quality.
said like I think the Rhone still offers incredible value, and I think this is one example of that. And another one would be, up and coming producers or smaller growers that don't necessarily get the big visibility or the branding behind them. I think that's important. I also think, if you look, it's pretty close in style to a lot of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but Châteauneuf-du-Pape is a big brand in its own right. Whereas people may be a bit more cautious about, oh, I don't really know any Gigondas. I haven't tried any. I don't know. Whereas they feel more safe with an appellation like Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So, even within the Southern Rhone, you can find some appellations that are lesser known, or
Mm.
that offer a similar style and profile, but a bit cheaper.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that is a relief, Leslie. You don't just have 4 months or so to drink it. You've got plenty of time for
I
this.
just saw a comment about 2016. I've tasted quite a
Yeah.
lot of 2016, and it's drinking. They're really starting to come into their own. I would definitely recommend opening some, taking out of reserves, but still have plenty of time. The ones that I've been fortunate enough to taste.
So we're staying in the Southern Rhone, and we are talking about now that big behemoth of a appellation, so Châteauneuf-du-Pape. That is our second wine. So this is from Domaine de Vieux Télégraphe. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this is probably one of the most iconic Chateauneuf de Pape producers. So when we were talking about value, the wines are very great, but they're a big star, so probably come at a higher price point, should we say? And Chateauneuf is much bigger. It's 3,300 hectares more or less, spread over 5 communes, um, and they're pretty, known for the galets roulés, so these sort of round pudding stones, and gobelet vines, and compared to Gigondas, the altitude here is about 120. So I said, at Gigondas you're getting 400 meters. Now altitude is quite important because you get that bit more freshness in the wines. So that's why that's sort of quite key, I think. And sorry, I was just trying to find my sample. Yeah, we're on the 2018 vintage.
Yeah.
Just spilled some more red wine on my carpet. Great. So Vieux Télégraphe's owned by the Brunier family. They took this, they created this in the late 19th century. And they have about 100 hectares in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, so they're pretty big. And a large percentage of that is planted on Le Creux, which is probably one of the most sort of famous vineyard sites in Châteauneuf, really high quality producers and plantings, because lots of old vines there. So it's a really good vineyard site. This particular wine has got about 65% Grenache, some Mourvedre, Syrah, and a small, about 5% of the other permitted grape varieties. So those other permitted grape varieties will be Cinsault, Cunoise, Muscadin, Vacquerez, Terre Noir. So you have about 13 permitted grape varieties planted, permitted. And yeah.
And do those other that 5% of the other permitted varieties, are they sort of like seasoning grapes? So they'll just kind of add little nuance to the.
They would probably be co-planted in the vineyard,
Mm.
rather than different parcels planted to those. But yes, it all adds this sort of seasoning. Each vintage is different with the different percentages. Grenache is very sensitive to flowering. So if there's cool weather, rain, lots of wind through the Mistral, and not sunny enough, Grenache is very susceptible to not flowering, and therefore the yield will be low. Uneven ripening will occur. So by having other permitted grape varieties, it sort of takes off the pressure and makes it commercial, quite frankly.
As Mark's just asked, would this make it a field blend?
Of the permitted varieties, that would be a field blend, but yes.
Yeah. And with the talking of the Mistral and the winds and how that can affect, that's why they're in that goblet pruning for the vine, so it kind of
like a little tree.
This is a goblet vine, so it's like a little goblet, so it's all protected, so they don't get too much of that sort of wind damage.
Yeah, it's so funny because when I was studying for the WSET and people talk about the Mistral wind, you're like, really? Is it that important? And then you go and visit, and it feels constant. And I don't actually think I could live there because it's just incessant, this wind. You drive past and all these trees are at an angle because because of the Mistral. It's quite funny, really.
So John's mentioning that the alcohol is the same as the Gigondas, but it's much less prominence. Would that be that it is? I mean, it's a year older. That's the right way around, isn't it? 18. So
Yeah.
with
I actually don't think it's because it's a year older. I think that's the vintage coming into play.
okay, yeah,
So it wasn't as powerful as 19. And it's always been a vintage where there was a warm summer, but it was sort of cooler during the spring, and you had this sort of Indian summer. So for September, which had nice sunny, warm days, but then you had like a diurnal shift in the
Mm.
evening where the temperatures cooled, so the grapes could retain acidity. So it just feels like 18 was a lot more sort of juicy, accessible in style. Those tannins weren't as firm as well. So it just feels like 18 has always been ready to drink compared to
Mm.
19, which I still think is just a little bit I wouldn't say jarring, but it just needs time. There's just so much about it. It's so exuberant that um, yeah, you just need to give it a bit more time for it to really come into its own. Um, Whereas the 2000, yeah, 2018 just feels so charming and
Yeah, but it's very approachable. It's
yeah,
been very approachable in its sort of full life cycle in a way
yeah.
so far.
It feels riper than 20, but not as powerful and structured as 19.
Hmm. And Peter said that he thinks the nose is lovely on the Châteauneuf, but the tannins he's finding still a little bit raw. Would decanting help? I mean, I think
I think having with food would help a lot.
yeah,
Um,
because I think if you decanted it, there's
the aromas come out. It becomes yeah. I think that it needs food or it needs time.
yeah,
If
yeah,
you're finding the tannins too much for you, yeah, I think
something that was kind of
it's still
salty.
young. 2018 is still young for a Chateauneuf of this quality, of this caliber. Again, it's these old vines um, going into this. So yeah, you'd hope it lasts. You'd hope it would age a bit longer as well.
Yeah,
You're spending this amount of
absolutely.
money on it as well.
Yeah, so show it a good meal, Peter. Let it do its best. Now, wine number three, that is Côte-Rôtie. So we are now going to move into the Northern Rhone. So I'm just going to
And the furthest north.
yes, I'm just going to get my new map, which is I find the Northern Rhone slightly easier because it's quite linear. Um, at least in map form, it's more linear than a like the Southern Rhone. So here we go.
Someone was just asking a question about, do you find sorry, I can't get it up now. Do you find the Rhone wines still close? Was it
Let's
closed down?
see. Do Rhone wines still have a tendency to shut down for a period of years? Oh yes, the tricky teenage years of the Rhone.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And actually, when I visited in the autumn, I tasted a lot of whites, which I just assumed that you would drink a lot of them early, and then they will pass their best, really. But they also go through a stage of shutting down for a while, and then become a lot fresher and less disjointed. So that was really interesting. So I'm going to start laying down a lot more white Rhones as well. But yes, and it's not an exact science, to be honest. I think every producer is different, and they would recommend at different stages of when you should drink it. A lot of them are drink within the first 2 years, and then it will close down. For how long? Which is,
Wait and see.
if you can afford it, that's why it's so good to buy a case of wine. So you can actually, open one bottle in a few years' time and like, oh no, it's not quite ready, needs a bit more time. That's the ideal, but I appreciate that that's not possible for everyone. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. But then actually keeping an eye out for those wines that are perhaps um, being sold at their sort of their optimum. They've gone through that tricky period and now they're being sold for kind of ready drinking,
Yeah.
where someone like the Wine Society may have done that hard work for you of keeping it while it's in its tricky period.
Yeah, and I think a lot of journalists as well tend to do tastings of 10 years on, or that sort of thing. So keep an eye out, and I'm sure there's somebody that has tasted some of these wines or these vintages anyway, that has a good idea of what stage in the evolution that wine is at.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, just before we go back, yeah, just before we continue on to Côte-Rôtie, because this feels like quite a nice question to have as a midpoint before we move south north. Mark's asking, how extensive is organics and or now BDI? I'm presuming you're talking biodynamics, Mark, rather than any other acronym. But the extensiveness of organics and biodynamics amongst the samples this evening, I suppose a broader question is within the Rhone in general, because I think that's something that is becoming much
Yeah,
more prevalent across the wine world.
I think so. I think a lot of these producers this evening are probably working organically and biodynamically. Whether they're certified, that's a different matter, because that's quite expensive. But yeah, Moulin de la Gardette, that's organic. I don't know if it's certified. I'm sure it is. Vieux Télégraphe, yes. Not sure if they're biodynamic though. And Gerin have just moved. That's the Côte-Rôtie one that we're about to taste. They've just become certified organic from 23 vintage. So I don't know exactly. We can obviously let people know after the tasting, I guess,
Yeah.
about the ones we're tasting.
But
But
I think
I think it's becoming more important.
yeah. And that is a good point as well, though. There's probably, I mean, just in general winemaking and vineyards, there's probably so many more that work to organic or biodynamic principles, but they don't have the certification because whether it's on a cost or there's the element of it being slightly restrictive, and it's very I mean I find it's very easy to kind of as a consumer and an enjoyer of wine to kind of romanticize winemaking to an extent that you sometimes can not necessarily forget, but the actual impact of, you know, a bad year or like excess rains at harvest or real excess winds and the way that the climate is changing. This is livelihoods that
Mm.
you know, it's right down to at its heart, it's farming, but it makes something really nice. So yeah, those whether having the certification for organic or biodynamic is actually the most important thing to have, or whether it's just to try and work as well as you can at those principles, but have the leeway to make the changes that producers would need to. So it's yeah, it's something that we're all very much more aware of at the moment, I think, and going forwards. But, yeah, so shall we go to the Côte-Rôtie?
Yeah. Have you got your map?
I do. Here we go. So we are at the top.
Yeah, we're at the top, so about 30 kilometers south of Lyon, and about an hour north actually from Thann-l'Hermitage. So when you say the Northern Rhone, well, I used to think that it was so everything was close together, but actually it's about an hour north from Thann, where the Hermitage Hill is, up to Côte-Rôtie. So even when you talk about the Northern Rhone and you talk about the weather and the vintage, it can vary quite dramatically, which is quite interesting. So Côte-Rôtie is pretty famous, but actually it only has about 330 hectares in total. So it's quite small. And it's famed for these sort of really steep granite schist slopes, and quite a few producers with small sort of holdings, I guess. That's a real theme, I guess, when you have all these sort of steep sloped vineyards, terraces that are really hard, high labor intensity. It's quite difficult to manage. So people tend not to have sort of big holdings necessarily. And this one, relatively small producer, Domaine Gerin, was set up in only in 83 actually, by Jean-Michel Gerin, and now his sons have just recently taken over, Michael and Alexis, who are, that's the sort of young generation I was talking about and what they're doing. And I think this estate has been quite famed for using quite a lot of new French oak, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I find it very difficult to understand terroir when there's quite a lot of new oak covering that, but they've really pulled back. And again, I said that they've just moved to certification of organic viticulture in 23 vintage. All this sort of these small changes that they're making, and I think it's really making a difference on the quality of the wine as a result. So they have about 12 hectares in Côte-Rôtie. They have a similar amount in Condrieu as well. They have 2 vineyards there that we work with. This wine, I've forgotten what vintage it is.
With 21 for this one.
21, okay. So this really divides people because it's a bit of an anomaly. You had 2018, 2019, 2020, then you had 21, followed by 22, 23, and 24, which are quite sort of bigger vintages, whereas 21 was cool, wet. And as a result, there are a lot of wines that are a little dilute. And in some cases, for the reds, you've really, the grapes didn't ripen. And if you didn't select carefully, there's lots of underripe grapes. And therefore, you're getting these sort of green tannins come through on the wine, which you don't get here because the sort of attention to detail, the selecting that's going on in the vineyard. Once you've picked the grapes, the sorting tables, and the number of people at the sorting table eliminating underripe and rotten grapes are removed. So I find this wine very well balanced, and I really like 21s. I think in a blind tasting, it's always very easy to spot them, which I quite like. But they're very approachable and easy to drink, and the alcohol's not too high. They're not overly powerful. Just a pleasure to drink. So I know some people think they're quite dilute. I really like them. I think it's just a matter of taste. If you like the sort of bigger, powerful reds, 21 vintage is not for you. Go to 22, go to 19, go to 18, and just leave 21. But if you like the cooler vintages, 21 is great. 24 is even better. As in it's slightly warmer and riper than 21, but it's still on that sort of more classical, I guess, profile of wines from like the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, so because we've gone right back down to 13%, which is a very approachable red wine.
Yeah.
I think that's a very pleasant, palatable, and I think Richard's commented that it's fresh and has elegance and charm. It's not a blockbuster, and yeah, I think that is that's true, and it is that elegance and charm to it. I mean, it says here we've got about 60% new oak.
Yeah, which I don't feel. Yeah.
No, it feels like it wears it very lightly. There's that little bit of creamy spice, but it's very well, for me, it feels very well integrated.
Yeah, and I think that's probably also the vineyard coming into play here. La Viallière is a lieu dit from the Côte Brune. Côte Brune it's like a dark schist. And the result of that, these wines are quite powerful and structured. So that's probably come into play here.
I don't want to stake a claim too soon, but might be my favourite so far.
So how many winemakers still add a lot of Viognier? Not as many actually. These guys tend to. They add a certain percentage in, but it's not as popular as it once was.
And is that something, um, would they have to declare that
You don't
they're?
have to declare it now. You're allowed to do it. I think that what the Viognier does, it adds a bit more perfume. It becomes a lot more aromatic. So
Hmm.
that's the benefit of doing that. I think someone said they didn't like the Côte-Rôtie. It's quite hard actually to taste. Go from the south to the north. The reason why we did it was because we were going for some. We had some older vintages from the north, so it sort of felt like the right way to go. But I guess um, makes it a bit more challenging, especially the 21 vintage coming after sort of more powerful wines.
Yeah.
Can be a bit disjointing, I guess.
And James is asking whether they're trying to make Coke Roti a bit more approachable for sooner drinking rather than just down to vintage conditions.
Um, I, well, I guess actually maybe that's one of the reasons why these guys are using less um, new French oak, because actually when you do that, you the wine needs time because the tannins
Yeah.
are a lot grippier, and it sort of overpowers in a way the wine, so you need longer. Um, yeah, I guess that could be one of the reasons.
Yeah.
Obviously, vintage decisions, vintage things also come into play. 21 is very approachable. If you had the 2000, yeah, 2019 next to it, that would need more time.
Mm.
Um, so yeah,
Hey. So wine number four is the Cornas. So yes, let me get the map back up and we can
so we're going a bit
remind ourselves
further
where Cornas
south.
is. Oh yeah, we're taking a bit of a jump, aren't we? So we are now going quite a bit further south of the within the Northern Rhone.
Yeah. So Cornas is sort of renowned for being quite powerful, smoky, structured, often a bit rustic. Um, they're not everyone's cup of tea. They can be a bit farmyardy, I guess.
Mm.
Um, there are some producers that create a more sort of polished style. Like if anyone's had Vincent Paris, for instance, if you like the Domaine Syrah Cornas, that's probably definitely the more sort of traditional styles. Um, again, like Côte-Rôtie, steep vineyards are here. So you have quite a few producers, but with small holdings because it's hard work. And Domaine de Tunel, they have they're based in Saint-Péray, just on the outskirts of the village, up in the hills. But they have various vineyards in Cornas, Saint-Péray, Saint Joseph. So uh, we're tasting their 2020. Stéphane Robert, who is the owner winemaker, he runs the estate with his wife. His daughter is just starting to become involved. So again, that generational change. She's not working there full time yet. Set up in 94, now has 12 hectares. He has a lot of high percentage of old vines and on steep slopes. And it's probably one of my most favorite wineries to visit because you go up this windy hill just as you come out of Saint-Péray, and you enter the doors, and it's an old railway tunnel, and it's about 170 meters long, and all the barrels are aging along this tunnel. It's a great place to visit. I would recommend it. They do lots of open days and have various festivals. So if you do go to the region, look out for it because it's, I imagine, pretty spectacular to go on one of those sort of open days
Mm.
with various food trucks and music and everything. Um, this Cornas, it's from various different parcels, and I don't think I said it, but it's 100% Syrah, and it spends about just over a year in barrel,
I've
but
got that
old, no
lovely
new oak.
peppery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the classic Northern Rhone Syrah is,
Mm.
and not everyone can smell that. So it's a compound called rotundone, but not everyone can perceive that black pepper character, which is rather interesting.
Mm. It's very it's almost quite it's almost aromatic with the like the perfumed black pepper. You think of like freshly grinding like
Yeah.
with those peppercorns.
And 2020, I think, was a very sort of the style of the vintage was very accessible, very floral, very perfumed,
Mm.
and um, you had these warm periods, and in the summer it was pretty hot. But again, you had those cool evenings, which were really important. Because you have the warm sunny days that facilitate photosynthesis and sugar production, but those cool nights are equally as important, if not more, because they slow respiration down, so you retain the acidity and those aromatic compounds.
Mm. Of the sorry, that just caught me. Of the sort of the farmyard rusticy notes, Peter's just mentioned that he's old enough to remember when some of these wines from Cornas were fermented with Brettanomyces, with that kind of real gamey flavour. Is that something that we're not really seeing used in the same way? Because it is a fault, but when it's used in a controlled way, it can add a little nuance to the wines in like in a pleasant way that, upping that gamey farmyard sense.
I don't think I know of any producer that would want to be adding Brettanomyces to the wine anymore. If anything, you're really trying to remove it from the cellar, although who knows if it comes from the vineyards or not.
Mm.
And like you say, sometimes it does add complexity. Um, Also, some people are more susceptible to Brett than others.
Mm.
Some people can't detect it, but some people can. I can detect it, but I'm actually quite tolerant of it at low levels. But if I can't smell or taste any other characteristic other than that sort of plaster note, the really sort of animal, almost like fox smelling character, I just don't want to drink it. And also, when a wine has Brett, the tannins become really dry and firm. So it's not pleasant aromatically or texturally, structurally. Um, so, but some people really like it.
Yeah, I always remember I think it was sort of student level three for OST having it described as sweaty saddle. And
Yeah,
I hope it's the horse's sweat, but it isn't something that really kind of evokes a real pleasant smell in the same way that kind of rustic is a little bit kind of countryside coverall.
yeah. I guess a lot of the Cornas sort of aromatics that I'm getting are sort of the more sort of graphite
Mm.
notes. And then like tapenade,
Yeah.
that sort of character. This definitely doesn't have Brett. Um, and I think this is a more of the sort of more, I guess, more modern. I don't really want to say modern, but it's not as rustic as some Cornas can be.
Mm.
Very approachable.
Yeah.
Um,
It does feel quite Mediterranean
yes.
with that tapenade, with that sort of that sometimes that slight more balsamic kind of note that's a little bit kind of sweeter to it as well. Again, I mean, it's such a food friendly wine.
Yeah, I like 2020s are drinking so well right now,
Yeah.
because you have this sort of warmth from the vintage, but you also get that freshness. You don't get the high alcohols that you were seeing in 19 or 22.
Mm.
So they feel a lot more balanced. It's especially when things are starting to become quite alcoholic. It's very hard to drink more than one glass. So it's definitely on something at the back of my mind. And this just feels really balanced. It's tasting really well, actually.
What I think is interesting as well that you've touched on a few times is where with the younger generations coming in and not either kind of starting to not take over, but with the plans to follow on from like their parents. Is that something that you think is perhaps happening a little bit more in the Rhone? Because I know there are other French regions, say like Bordeaux, for example, which is having some of the wineries and producers are suffering almost in that they have their, sons, daughters, generations after them that aren't necessarily as interested in taking over. And I know that's way back when we were first talking about sustainability at the Wine Society when it was a bit of a focus. That's one of the things that, the sustainability of people as well, whether that's going to be something, but is in the Rhone, do you think that there is perhaps maybe more interest of those younger generations, particularly if they've done vintages elsewhere in the world, because Rhone varietals are so popular in other places, so like Australia, even over to South Africa, because they've are able to kind of share that commonality.
Yeah, I think that's key actually, because a lot of the sort of younger generation that I've spoken to, if you ask where else have you worked, a lot of them will say a lot the new world, I guess, South Africa, New Zealand, America.
Yeah.
So it's they're keen to travel or have traveled and embrace as well. I think that's really key. Like you need to evolve, you need to adapt. Things are changing. A lot of the producers are aware of the current economic, political, whatever climate. Um, they're realizing that they need to appeal to a younger generation, inspire people to engage. And I think definitely a lot of these smaller producers as well, they've got a story to tell. And that, that's what people want. People want to know. They want to know where their wine has come from, what's gone into it. And that's really inspiring. And I think that's probably what's kept the sort of continuity of the generations involved, because it's hard work, not it's farming essentially, especially on some of these steep vineyards. It can't be much fun working them 12 months a year.
Yeah.
So something needs to sort of inspire them to keep them there. And I think by traveling, they're learning from other people working with these great varieties.
Yeah. And perhaps seeing how your, for younger own winemakers that have just grown up with these varieties in their family plots and their family wineries, seeing how those varieties are received in other places and how they come across in other wines made in different parts of the world and how they're championed in those places as something new. And it's like, well, actually, there's all this interest and appeal of them and love of these grapes. Actually, kind of is quite reinvigorating as to, well, we do that, so let's kind of keep it going. And it just, it helps that that things like where we've had the takeover for the last couple of weeks and just general road interest, that being able to bring those smaller producers to people's palates and to
Mm.
taste those wines and actually kind of hear about them and meet producers, that's like invaluable for it.
Yeah, I think it's important, obviously the Rhone is quite a well-established wine region. And sometimes it can be like, oh, what's new, what's happening, etc. Elsewhere it seems all exciting. But actually there is importance in continuity as well. But there is that younger generation, there's people coming to the region as well,
Yeah.
inspired by what's happening, inspired by the surroundings and what they can do, and are setting up projects as well. So there is a lot of exciting things happening. I think we'll see that over the next few years.
Yeah, fun, exciting. Um, so we are on to wine number 5, which is the Saint Joseph from Jean-Louis Chave. So I'll get the map
Sorry,
back.
I wasn't organised as you then with all your, your wine glasses.
You stay organised. I did a quick a quick run into the glasses room before leaving the office. And
Um,
Didn't have anything to put them in other.
so Saint Joseph is a quite a big appellation. It covers in length 30 miles on the right bank. So I'm always warning people. Yeah, number four. So that green is bigger, much bigger than any other appellation here. So I always warn people that quality is varying. So pick your producer wisely, essentially, because there's a lot of vineyard planted, and you just want to, it's the granite steep slopes are amazing in terms of quality. Um, so there is lots of good producers out there, for sure. Um, and this is Jean-Louis Chave, who we've worked with for a number of years. He does our exhibition Hermitage Red and White, which is amazing. Rather crazily, it's passed on for the generations for about 500 years, which is mad. And they have one of the biggest holdings of Hermitage, just over, and which is pretty impressive because they just have over 14 hectares. Jean-Louis bought about a hectare in the autumn of 137 hectares total. So he's actually based in Saint Joseph. If you ever go through the village along the main street, there's a really small sign. You wouldn't even know that the winery's there. And then it's like a labyrinth. It just opens up into all these cellars. It's an amazing place. If anybody ever gets a chance to visit, it's very unassuming, which is pretty funny for someone this big. He's a pretty iconic producer. And sorry, what was this vintage?
The 2019
19. Okay, so again, we're back to that sort of powerful, structured.
Yeah, so 15% alcohol for this one.
Yeah.
No.
It was a warm vintage. It was warm and dry. But I guess at the time people thought it was very close to 03. But the difference being in 19, the June and July were really warm. I think quite a few days over 40 degrees. But in August, things mellowed. So it wasn't as hot. So you weren't getting the vines shut down. You weren't getting sunburn on the grapes. You weren't getting these sort of dried, stewed characters. And the tannins are firm, but they're not drying. You don't go like this the whole time. They're there, they're present, and this wine does need time, but it's not overboard or overblown, I don't think.
No, I'm getting quite a bit of like kind of juiciness as well. It's like the fruit is very intense as well. So it feels very kind of balanced for me. And are we 100% Syrah again with
Yes, we are. Yeah. Yeah, I would give it more time. If I had a bottle of this, I wouldn't be opening it now personally. But with some food, I think the aromatics are really expressing themselves. You're getting the sort of the bramble sort of notes.
yeah. Because this is our longest drink date yet, so we're at 2032 for this one, but still
Yeah, I would probably
conservative.
think 34,
Mm.
34, 35 to go on longer. But yeah, I know we're a bit more conservative with drink dates.
Mm. The Claire's saying thinks it's the San Josef is fabulous, bit too big for food. What would you drink it with? Go big with food. So
It's too big
too big for food. So what would you drink it with? Um, Something that is powerfully flavored. So
yeah, like a
slow,
goulash or
yeah, those real slow cooked
mignon.
stews.
Yeah.
Um,
And also
things that are rich.
stews like
Mm,
tagines that have a bit of spice as well.
yeah,
I think that goes really well with Syrah. Um, Syrah is a very structured grape. It's got plenty of acidity, it's got plenty of tannin. This wine has got plenty of alcohol. It's a powerful wine, so I don't think there's many foods that are going to overpower it as such.
no. And also don't be, it's got so much power, so don't be scared of going for things that have spice and, whether that's a little bit of it may amp up the alcohol for you slightly. And I don't always mean spice as in like full on chili and peppers, but things like cumin, things like cloves, star anise, things that have some warmth to them and that kind of that earthiness um, really is good if it's strongly flavored. Also, you can look to use, your cuts of meat that perhaps are a little bit tougher, a little bit things that you would put into something that's slow cooked. Yeah, short ribs, great. Things that you need, things it sounds silly to say meat that's high in protein, but those really kind of really like proteiny, high, maybe high fat, good bit of salt as well. Salt helps to nicely soften out those tannins. Um, yeah. Pulled pork, yeah.
Pork, yeah, brie, nice. I'm getting hungry now.
Yeah. So meat. And if you're not a meat eater, you could look at your big mushrooms. I know that's a little bit of there's the obvious alternate, but things that are um harissa aubergines, things that are slow cooked. Again, going back to those sort of North African, Middle Eastern tagine sort of fully flavored dishes.
Yeah, this is delicious. I think for me so far, this is like the wine of the tasting. It's just so classy, and you'd expect nothing less from Jean-Louis Chave, to be honest.
Yeah.
You, his wines don't disappoint.
Yeah, it's very delicious. So, oh, we are very well on time. So let's move to our final wine for this evening, which was the Crozes-Hermitage.
Mm.
And this is our oldest wine. So this is 2012. There was a little question earlier up as to why this tasting order was chosen. So obviously it is different to the order that was on the sheet in your pack. I think because we wanted to kind of look at doing Southern Rhone first and then the Northern Rhone and kind of going in order of youngest to oldest, do we?
Yeah, I think sometimes I prefer to taste the older wines towards the end, and yeah, I think that various tasting orders would work well tonight. So this is just what we went for.
Yeah. But it's one of those things, isn't it? That often it can be quite subjective and also when you've got a selection of wines like this, they have that commonality, but there are also such differences to them. There could be a number of ways we could have done this lineup and it would have, come across quite differently. So trying to choose a tasting order
Yeah,
is not always the easiest. But yeah, so we are now in Crozes-Hermitage. So
yeah. So
is
the the biggest appellation in the Northern Rhone, that sits just behind the hill of Hermitage. Um, and the last time I spoke to a producer was in the autumn, and he said there's about 2,000 hectares of Crozes-Hermitage planted under vine, which is an awful lot. So again, varying quality. So you need to know the producers to choose wisely, I think. And a lot of Crozes-Hermitage is planted on the flats, an area called Les Chassis. But there are certain vineyard parcels that are on steeper slopes, and also especially the ones just behind the Hermitage Hill. They offer incredible value because it's a very similar soil typed Hermitage. So if you know those sort of vineyards and parcels, they're definitely worth exploring. Um, Domaine de Thalabert is one of the oldest domains of the Appellation. It was bought by the Jaboulet family in 1834, and then the Frey family bought Jaboulet in the early 2000s. And up until recently, the winemaker there has been Caroline Frey. She's now left to explore some a Swiss project, so is no longer there. But this is probably the most sort of famous Crozes Hermitage, I think, Domaine de Thalabert, produce wines that definitely long-lived compared to a lot of Crozes, and very consistent as well, I think, across the board. Old vineyard plantings from 34, 75, and the wine spends about probably about 15 months in a mixture of French barrels, some foudre or demi-nuit, which is about 600 litres, some cement, and probably about a small percentage of new French oak as well.
Is that something that's quite becoming a bit more popular and I suppose modern, having some of the aging in concrete?
Yeah, I think so, especially the people that are pulling away from a lot of new French oak. What other materials give, different texture, different aromatic profiles and things. Concrete's neutral, but it gives a different sort of feeling on the palate. More so, it's more porous and open than stainless steel, for instance. So it's a good alternative to that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does. It feels very fashionable to have concrete eggs in that shape, which actually the shape can influence a lot because that sort of egg shape and just like the natural sort of movement of the wine and then the lees. So you might, depending on whether it's white or red, depending, you might not need to do batonage, etc., because there's just like a natural flow and movement in the wine.
And we're back at 13% for this one.
Yes.
Do you think maybe that, with this, it's hard to say, like, if this was made now for this vintage, do you think that is because the vintage is 2012, that alcohol, if it was the same, well, it wouldn't be the same conditions, but if it was sort of this year, would it have been perhaps a higher alcohol just because of how climate change and temperature has moved, or is it just lucky that 2012 has meant that it's a quite approachable alcohol?
I think it's the style of the vintage more than climate change impact. It's 2012 is quite fresh and fruity, and it was quite variable in weather conditions. So spring was quite wet. Summer was a bit later. You did get the heat, but it wasn't prolonged. There were a few storms. It was quite variable. There were some cooler conditions. And I think that's then influenced the perfume and the structural profile of it. I think, I think what would I say, like a vintage, more recent one that we tasted, probably slightly cooler than 2020, for instance, but definitely that lower sort of alcohol and that freshness of acidity.
Yeah.
Probably closer to 2020, I think. It's definitely warmer than 21. So yeah, probably just like a mix between those.
Yeah. Mark's asked, in similar vein to the eggs, are there any Rhone producers that are sort of adopting Qvevri or sort of similar clay like amphora for
Yeah, interesting. Not that I've seen, but lots of this sort of younger generation that have taken over, they do have their own oh no, actually, I tell a lie. There is There's a producer in Baccarat who has she's doing she just used a few great yeah, did some grapes and did some clay vessels, yeah, but not commercializing yet, but she's experimenting. So yes, there are people experimenting. Forgot.
Yeah. And again, it's nice because you're getting that's like that micro oxygenation, isn't it, from it being relatively inert, but obviously clay being different to concrete in the kind of neutrality of it. But you're getting that kind sometimes you're getting a bit more of the texture without having
Yeah,
to use
I
oak.
think so, and especially in the southern Rhone, I was talking about Baccarat. It's a warm Mediterranean climate.
Yeah.
Grenache is known for producing, high alcohols, quite powerful wines in a way. And by looking at sort of alternative vessels like clay rather than oak, um, I think that's definitely an avenue that producers should be exploring. Um, Especially if you've got these powerful wines and the tannins are quite dry because of the heat, you don't want to be adding more tannin through new oak to it. So you've just got to be mindful of that.
Mm. Well, that's a Paul just said he's never kept crows this long. Surprised what a delight it is. It's,
Yeah, and actually, I tasted in the autumn the Thalabert 2010, which we've offered as part of the fine wine takeover, and I was seriously impressed.
mm,
Yeah, because you just don't think crows can age very well, but it does. And that I think the 2010 at the moment's at £40. The Wine
wow.
Society. It's like amazing
Yeah,
value.
absolutely. I mean, that has been an excellent sort of run through of some of the real stars of the Rhone, like a real interesting overview of the different styles, the north and south, that commonality between them all, but actually there really is so much difference to them as well. And it's super interesting to hear sort of how the vintage plays its part, how those soils play the part, and actually just what the winemakers do, what they want to have for their wines. So thank you, Fiona. That's
Oh, that's fun.
been a great hour. I do just have a little poll to pop up, members. So if you would like to do a little vote just on your favorite of the six, if you've been tasting along with us.
Oh, can I vote as well?
If you can see it,
I can, yeah.
hopefully, yes. I don't think I'm allowed to vote, but I
Oh no,
will.
it says host and panelists cannot vote. That's not fair.
Oh. We've got votes coming in. Mm.
Not fair. Well, mine was the San Jose.
I think, do you know what I'm going to stick? Mine was the
They're
Côte-Rôtie.
rotating.
Yeah.
Nice.
Uh, and what's lovely is that every wine is getting a favourite. I'm going to leave that a little more. It's a little fastest finger first sort of job. Yeah, Leslie, so voted for the San Josef, but the Gigondas fantastic value, absolutely. Right.
I think there was a question, or it was like, if time allows, comment on the recent special
Yeah.
parcel of Peran 2020 wine offer appreciated. Well, I'm sort of tied in the sense that I can't say the vineyard if that's what the member was asking. All I can say is um, it's very good value for the
Mm,
money, and it is a single vineyard. It is extremely close to the village of Gigondas. So if you look at a map, it's pretty. It's yes, it's you can see it from the village, and it tastes amazing. So, um, as I said earlier, 2020 is drinking so well right now.
yeah. And I think maybe perhaps a final question from Stuart, if you have any first thoughts on 2025.
I haven't tasted that much of 2025, apart from sort of the new vintage releases, which sort of the earlier drinking wines, which are showing very fresh and everything. Um, it was, I think, a very challenging vintage for a lot of producers. When I was visiting tasting the 24s in autumn, so early September, um, and late September, they were having lots of storms. So it was all down to when you picked. Because obviously rot and mildew setting in is a big problem. So again, like how well different producers reacted to those sort of changing conditions. So
Mm. Keep an eye out for what comes next.
everyone that I've spoken to so far is positive, which you would expect. But I think it was hard work, a lot of time out in the vineyard, and a lot of sorting needed as well.
And Fiona, did you say that the Sanchez was your favourite?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you are in the majority. So it comes out that the Sanchez is the favourite of the six. But what is lovely is that every wine got at least one vote. So it's nice to see that there is a bit of the Rhone for everyone. So thank you, members, for taking part and getting so involved in the chat. It's lovely to hear what you think, and thank you so much, Fiona. That's it's been a brilliant hour with you.
No, thank you. Thanks, everybody.